This is Experience Imagination, a themed entertainment podcast by Falcon's creative group.
Story connects people to the experience.
Every aspect of creativity is brought together.
We wanted to do something different and fresh.
There are so many different disciplines that are involved in this industry.
Nothing will get you further than your passion.
This entire process is just making us better designers.
We're really pushing the envelope.
Welcome back to Experience Imagination. I'm Audrey DeLong. For this episode, which dropped at the end of May, we are talking about sparking creativity because May 30th is National Creativity Day. When most people think about creativity, they picture actual arts, like works of fiction, architecture, films and TV shows, movies, probably the culinary arts as well, and of course, literal art, like you hang on the wall. So, it's all those right brain types of things, but they might not think about the logical side of the equation. Things like how to find space for all the new people you're hiring, or coming up with a solution that no one else imagined. There are all sorts of ways to be creative in life. But let's talk about being creative in your job. When employees are given freedom to contribute creatively, it's often said they are happier, more invested in their work, and more loyal to their company. So, later in this episode, I'm going to talk to two of my colleagues, a creative director and a concept artist, about what it takes to maintain a high level of creativity and how creativity plays a part in their roles, and also how collaboration feeds creativity. But first, I'm going to speak with Lee Kitchen, a 5-star innovation catalyst, workshop leader, culture change agent, design thinking trainer, and seasoned meeting facilitator. He enjoyed a really long career at Disney before starting his own consulting company, so he's going to be an interesting guy to talk to. All right, welcome, Lee Kitchen.
How's it going?
It's going good. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Audrey. I'm really excited about this.
So I want to get into your career a little bit, Lee. You spent 32 years at Disney. Tell us what you did there.
So it was a dream job for me. So since I was 6 years old, I dreamed only of working at Walt Disney World. I turned 18, graduated high school, loaded up my truck, and drove 2,500 miles out to Orlando. I started in attractions, and I worked a lot of belt attractions. So it was like, hey, how are you? How many's in your party? Watch your step right here. Hi, how are you today? How many's in your party? Watch your step. 8 hours a day, all day long. Didn't matter. I just loved every minute of it. From there, I went to guest relations. So I got a chance to really empathize and, see things through our guests' eyes. And that led me into a 25-year career in marketing. So I started in special events, and I helped start things like the Epcot Food and Wine Festival. Yes, one of the best events at Epcot. Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I was on the opening team for that. I was really excited about that. And then I became a brand person, a brand and strategy manager. And then I spent my last 10 years working for a group called the Yellow Shoes Creative Group, which is Disney's in-house advertising agency. And I was an innovation catalyst. Basically, we were helping to change the culture into one of people that were readily available to think more creatively on a day-to-day basis.
Well, before we talk about what you do now, I want to ask you about the current state of creativity in the workplace. Is it at an all-time high, an all-time low, somewhere in the middle? Where are we as a species?
I love that. I love that question. It's really great. From my perspective, and I do a lot of sessions with a lot of different kinds of people, a lot of different kinds of companies. I believe it's at an all-time high. I think that it just needs releasing sometimes. So a lot of people inherently don't feel that they're creative. And when I come in to do a session for my clients, the comments I receive afterwards are, I can't believe that all you did was teach me a couple of things and I've been creative the whole time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's such a pleasure because it's like I've awoken something inside of them that they didn't even know that they had. And most of it is because in the business world, there's people on your team that are creative, and they usually have creative in their title or creativity in the title, and there's people in the groups that aren't creative, supposedly. And
right.
And I always say, was your finance manager creative? Yes, they were, because they figured out what you should do with your budget at the very end of the fiscal year, didn't they? So, so I think it's something we kind of do to ourselves. But yes, I think it's an all-time high, and it continues to amaze me. Again, I get all these great messages about how it's transformed their lives, that they've realized that they're creative.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that a little bit later too. So what's the outlook for the future? Because there are AI-powered tools that seem like they would dull creativity. What do you think about that?
I got to tell you that I'm just diving into that as well. And I'm a big proponent of what I call stimulus. And stimulus is basically it's hard to go into a conference room and say, okay, don't come out of this conference room until you solve this challenge, right? And when you get in the conference room, you got nothing. You're looking around at a bunch of white walls and there's nothing going on. So I always say stimulus starts with a conversation. So if you and I are brainstorming something, just our back and forth is going to ignite our brain to think a little bit differently. And when you roll something through an AI generator, I'll just use ChatGPT as an example, it kind of propels you forward because sometimes it's really difficult to make that first step. So when you do that, it just acts as stimulus to get to something even better. I mean, rarely in my creativity world, my creativity colleagues, rarely do they use the first iteration of what comes out of that. They use it as a jumping off point. And to me, we all need jumping off points. We all need that stimulus in order to move through ideas. I'm a very big proponent of making sure that people get freshness in their lives. So whether or not it's listening to something different, it's driving home from work a different way, it's reading a different a book or a different style of book, something that kind of stimulates your brain, because when you're in that right mode to create ideas, that's how your brain puts those strange things together in order to get to the next level, really.
All right, well, let's get into the main goals of Magical Dude Consulting. Training teams to think more creatively, changing mindsets, helping teams invent solutions to their biggest challenges. These seem like very difficult things to do. What can you share about your process to make these things happen?
So design thinking, creative problem solving is a structured way to help people think differently. And it is a small process that helps make sure that you don't just go for the low-hanging fruit ideas, right? It really gets you outside of your current way of thinking, or what someone like Edward de Bono would call your river of thinking, right? So it forces your way out of that river so you can actually look at a challenge differently. And I use a bunch of great tools and things like that with groups of people to collaboratively kind of get to that next step.
Okay. Well, I know when you do workshops, you do a lot of training workshops with different companies. Is it blatantly obvious, I'm just curious, that its employees are suffering from a lack of creative energy in the workplace?
It really depends on where I go. And it also depends on their leadership. Usually it's because you've had an experience in life where you've had a really great idea and you've mentioned it to somebody and they gave you the idea look. I call it the look. It's like the stink eye and it's like, what is that? And so what I do is when I go into organizations, I call that out immediately. So I'm like, okay, now I want you to give your partner the look that you got the last time you had an idea. And when I tell people to kind of push pause on that, it's amazing the results that happen from it, because I say, okay, people are going to tell you an idea, you have to keep a straight face. And that's really difficult, because think about it. Last time you had an idea, if somebody gave you that look, most likely you would judge yourself next time and you might not say that idea. If you as a leader specifically, if you're killing people's ideas right out of the gate, you're totally squelching your potential over the course of that person's employment, right? So figure out a way to accept those ideas up front, figure out a way to make sure collaboratively people can do that, and you will elevate your whole organization because of it.
Yeah. I'll call it rejection. That kind of rejection sticks with people.
Yes, it does. And it makes you not want to say, you might have the best idea ever and you might not want to say it afterwards. So yeah, that's a big thing. It's really important, especially again, if you're a leader, to make sure you project that, because somebody from the ground at the bottom is going to come up with your best idea that's going to save your business, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You have to let them. Actually, Walt Disney was a big proponent of that Walt Disney has a quote that says, I would take an idea from, an architect and a janitor. I want everybody's ideas. Everybody's ideas are equal and awesome. So as a leader, you should be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the practices that Falcons puts in place. And it's a very strong characteristic of the culture here, which is one of the reasons I love it. Yeah. Going back to the thing you mentioned earlier, I'm sure people have said to you, I'm not a creative type. So what do you tell them? And I have a follow-up question. Can people actually learn how to be creative?
Yes and yes. So what I tell them is I'm like, okay, somehow when you were going to college, you made that top ramen sing all week long because that's all you could afford, and that stuff tasted differently every time you ate it, right? Somehow you got to work all week this week and you might not have got your clothes dry cleaned or done your laundry, but you're still looking good and you found some way to dress, right? So most people are creative and they just don't realize it. I find that people say that because they directly relate creativity with artistry. So I'm not a guitar player. I can't play the piano. I can't write a poem. And yes, those people are very creative. And like I said, they are what I call practice creatives because they are practicing their guitar all the time. They are practicing that piano. They are writing a lot of stuff. They are drawing a lot, right? But the people that aren't doing that say, oh, I'm not creative because, well, you are because of those other reasons I said. So it's just a matter of kind of thinking differently. And you have to make a habit of doing something different. And what you should do is actually put it on your calendar. So 1 hour out of every week, you're going to go look at a different article somewhere in a different genre. That weekend, you're going to watch a different television show and something. You're going to do something spontaneous that's outside of your comfort zone, and that will help you be more creative.
That's amazing. That's good advice. I'm wondering, what are some of the barriers to maintaining a high level of creativity in the workplace?
Do you want me to be honest with this question?
I do.
The biggest barrier I see to maintaining creativity is usually ego. And it's ego from the top down. So it's sometimes people keep their ideas close to the chest because they want to be credited for it and they want to be the hero. In my opinion, it's only going to be better if you share that idea with a colleague and you work together on that. Like, collaboration to me is both a barrier and an enabler, right? So if you're not collaborating and you think your ideas are better than other people's, yeah, you might be a really great ideator, but man, if you just add somebody else's input to that idea, it's only going to be bigger. So I say take that collaboration, make it an enabler, and put people on cross-functional teams, right? Put people from marketing together with people from operations together and see what they come up with, right? And that whole thing it drives me crazy. And the whole ego thing, it's like, I want to be the hero part of it. We're all going to be heroes. And those ideas are going to propel us all. So I have some really great clients that the part of creativity comes from the leader and they encourage it and they don't want to take credit for it. They want all of the people that work with them and work for them to basically collaboratively get the credit for it. And I find that those organizations tend to be the more creative.
Yeah, well, there you go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what kind of reception do you get when you're brought in for a training session or a workshop? Are people genuinely interested in being there and learning? And if they aren't, what techniques do you use to engage them?
Well, I find it's mix and match. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But usually if I get a negative reception, it's because someone has come in there before me. They've done a lot of what they call fluffy things, and they haven't had a result at the end. I get right down to business and I say, hey, this is some simple things we can do. And I have people do fun exercises that are initially funny, but what I'm trying to do is change their brain patterns into what I call the alpha brain mode to get them to come up with more ideas. And what happens is they come up with a bigger list and they're having so much fun that it opens up the door even more. And when they get to that one idea that's going to work really well for their business, they're like, wow, we would have never have got here unless you had taken us on that journey. And so that playfulness and having fun is a huge part of this, because when I ask people, hey, where do you come up with your best ideas? Of course, the number one answer is a shower. But most of the time people will say they're walking their dog, they're driving to work. Nobody actually ever says, oh, I come up with my best ideas at work. And there's a reason for that, and it's because our brains are so busy and distracted that it's hard for us to get in the right mode and the right mindset to come up with ideas, which is why I choose to be playful at my sessions, because again, it helps us be more like we're relaxed, like we're sitting in our living rooms or sitting at the bar writing on bar napkins, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You mentioned something, alpha brain mode. I kind of want to know more about that.
So, and I'm limited, I'm not an expert at this, but when I was learning creativity, I learned about 4 different ways your brain works. The first one is called beta mode, and the brain frequency when you're in beta mode is basically, I'm too busy to think. So you have a lot of things going on, and your brain isn't open to possibilities because you're so busy, right? And it's the reason what I was telling you about before, the conference room. When you know, your boss says, go in that conference room and don't come out until you come up with a good idea. And then you get in there and you're like, I got nothing, right? The next one is that's called alpha brain mode. And it's where you have a doorway between your conscious and subconscious called the reticular activation system. Boom,
Whoa. Remembered
it. But it's basically, it kind of gives you access to all the things in your subconscious, which is where, you know, you've stocked up because you've seen new things and you've been watching TV and you've been watching news articles, and all that stuff kind of comes together when you're brainstorming, and you're able to kind of use both. There's another one that's called theta, which theta is that time between unconscious and conscious. So famous people like Leonardo da Vinci, he would take advantage of this time. He'd rest basically holding his paintbrush until he was about to fall asleep. And then he woke right back up and drew whatever the first thing that came to mind. And we all saw kind of those drawings, right?
Wow.
And so that's great, except for at work, in a lot of work environments, it's not really cool to take a nap.
Yeah, not practical.
Right?
No.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's delta brain mode, which is when you're sleeping. And, you come up with a bunch of great ideas when you're sleeping, but most of the time when you wake up, you forgot them all.
Yeah.
Which is, I'd say always keep a notepad by your
Yes.
bedside.
Yeah.
Again, it's the reason that you come up with the greatest ideas when you're sitting at a bar with your buddies. That's just what happens. And I'd say that's the reason the bar napkin was invented. How many times have you seen people have this elaborate bar napkin that's got the biggest idea ever on it,
A lot of times, yeah.
Yeah.
I know you have a lot of good stories, Lee. So I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you to share one or two without identifying the company or the people, of course. But I want you to tell us a story about one or two challenging group sessions you led, and what did you do to help them find their way, find their inner creative beings?
I had a group of engineers a couple years ago, and their leader didn't tell them why they had to be there.
Uh-oh.
And so they instantly challenged, why are we here, right out of the gate? And the leader actually didn't show up. So the leader was supposed to show up and give the synopsis of what we're doing here. And I said, hey, they couldn't be here. I'm going to read out the challenge. This is what we're trying to solve for. I can't answer too many questions about it. So let's just go for how it's written and see what we come up with. And they resisted the first couple exercises they had. They came back with kind of low-hanging fruit. And then I gave them a tool that I call Break the Rules, which is, Break the Rules is all about identifying existing rules, asking what if that rule was different? What if it didn't exist? What if it were bigger? What if it were smaller? What if it were different in somehow? And then imagining a world that exists with that strange what if, right? So I gave them that tool, and that was the defining moment. When they came back with those ideas, they had not only solved their challenge, but they had come up with like the next level stuff that would basically crush their competitors. And that group was so excited. Like, it was the biggest turn I've ever had in an event before. And when they came back after that,
Nice.
And I got a note from the leader later saying, I don't know what you did, but we have our 5-year plan solidified. And I still have a buddy of mine that works in that organization, and he actually said that they took my likeness, and now it's on their idea site. So if you have a really good idea, it's got my little picture of my sunglasses on it.
Well, you're making a difference in a lot of ways. So I do want to wrap up by talking about your monthly inspiration report. What is that about?
Yeah, so once a month, my good buddy Sean Brown and I, we get together, we research the whole month for different ways that companies and other places are doing things. So it's a mixture of new products. It might be an old product that's done new experiences, services. We're marketing guys, so we show a lot of really innovative marketing ads and the way people are going for marketing. And we compile it all together in an hour-long what we call the inspiration report. And it's like, if you don't get any fresh input throughout the month, just show up for an hour and we will inspire you. It's usually on the first Friday. It's at 11:30 a.m. on my Twitch channel, which is LeeBXLT. So yeah, join us. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds like
You'll
a great
be inspired.
listen. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
There's no
thanks.
doubt. There's no doubt in my mind after this conversation. Yeah, for sure. All right, Lee. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Experience Imagination.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I loved all the questions. Really, really great.
It's time to welcome two of my colleagues, Mark Spenser, Creative Director and Master Planner. Hello, Mark.
Hello, how's it going?
All right. And we have Christine Arnold, Concept Artist.
Hello.
Hi, and thanks for joining me to talk about creativity. So, Mark, I want to start with you. You have a lot of experience working in quote-unquote creative roles. In addition to your work at Falcons as a creative director and master planner, you've been an art director and a production designer, and you also worked as a project manager and landscape architect. So tell us what you've learned about creativity and how you've grown as a creative director.
One of the biggest lessons, and I try sharing this with new people as I see them getting into the industry, is learning how to like creatively be attached to your work, but then emotionally be detached from your work.
Yes.
So that you don't take things personally when, like, just because your idea isn't selected doesn't mean you're a bad designer. But I think that lesson I learned all the way back in my schooling, because I had a professor that would pin up all of our work, and then we'd walk around and he would look at all of our work and he would just give it like this very strong evil eye. And he would just create this tension in the room. And then he'd point to something and he'd just go, garbage, that's garbage. And he just would destroy it and like hurt all of our feelings. His point was to like hurt our feelings, I think. I don't know. Because some of us would spend all night working on this stuff. And then he just would just say, this is garbage. But what it kind of taught me was that I can't be attached so much to the design and the work that I'm doing that emotionally hurts me.
Yeah.
So if I can be very professional with creativity and go, okay, we're going to accomplish this creative task and there's going to be bumps along the road, but if this works or that works or this doesn't work, I still go home at night and I'm not crying myself in my pillow.
Thankfully.
I think there's a lot of young creative professionals that get so attached to their work that it's a painful process. Because creativity is a painful process. There's not going to be a perfect creative solution that one person thinks of. It has to be passed around.
Yeah, I definitely know that firsthand because I'm very new to the industry. I'm very young for our industry. I personally have learned that lesson, and I've learned it the hard way multiple times. You cannot be attached to your work. Like, you can love it and you can appreciate it, but you got to know when it's like it's just not going to work, or people will tell you that it's not good enough or something like that, and you can't take that to heart and you got to move on to the next steps. Because I know I'll be very happy if it moves forward, but also if it doesn't, I'm not going to be heartbroken on it, and then I'll just move on to the next exciting thing because I know there is another exciting thing around the corner.
Right. Yeah, even though you are young, Christine, your work is stellar, and maybe one reason is because you went to Ringling College of Art and Design. Shout out to our friends in Sarasota, by the way. What did you learn about creativity there?
When I went to Ringling, everybody going in, especially in the animation, like, we had the creativity. We had the drive. We had the ideas. It's kind of like they were trying to take all of that and kind of hone it into something that was more like feasible. Like, how do you take all of those like crazy ideas, crazy like thoughts and stories, and like, how can we make this palatable to an audience? And I think that really helped me out here in Falcons, because now we're making things that are like tangible. So this has to be something that can be built and that people can experience. So it's kind of like, how do you make it so people understand your stories? People are going to relate to your characters and your art and the colors and the worlds. Like, how do you package that? And I think Ringling did a really, really good job of helping me, even in like an animation standpoint, like understand what works in the industry and then what doesn't.
I see. Yeah, I mean, collaborating in college is a big part of the educational process. And then also when you get into the workforce, you learn collaboration is even more important with your coworkers. So Mark, tell us what Falcons does to collaborate specifically.
The early stages are really about just throwing darts at the board and seeing what sticks, So I think you can't shoot down any idea too soon. And I always turn back in my head to if anyone takes an improv class, they have the whole phrase, the yes and phrase. So like when you're in an improv class, if you want to keep the scene going, the worst thing you can do to someone's line is say no, because it stops. There's a wall, and so you say yes, and then you transition the scene somewhere else. And so I think that same mentality works really well in the creative process. That an artist does something, or a master planner does something, or whatever comes to the table, even if it's no good, you don't start off with, oh, that's no good. You start off with, yes, and why don't we think about this, or why don't we focus on this or that? And so it creates a positive energy moving forward. And I think Falcons is really good at that, and being able to kind of pass the ball around to different talents, and not being afraid to let good ideas rise up from any designer and from any part of the process, that it's not no one's sitting on their throne with the idea ball and everything comes out of that one source.
Nobody wants to see somebody sitting on a throne.
On a throne.
Well, we'll stick with you, Mark. In your experience, what are some of the other vital components to maintaining a high level of creative engagement in the workplace?
Everyone has a creative process, but everyone can improve upon it. And myself, I try to think of what I've done in the last few years. And if I could list three of them, I think one is giving yourself unstructured time for research and thinking independently of any like billable project you're currently working on. Because we come to work, you know what you're doing, but you also need to give yourself some time to not be thinking about that project and just thinking about something else. And
Right.
so I think unstructured time is a very valuable spot, and we should almost have like a billable time for unstructured time. That would be amazing.
Suggestion box.
Suggestion box, yeah. And then another thought I've had is, us, we're so trained as humans and as adults to think and filter our own language. But I think there's some value if you speak before thinking too much, where you kind of just vomit out words and ideas as you're brainstorming. And if you're in a comfortable space with fellow creative employees, you're fine with saying a bad idea. You can say, well, let's have a carousel that goes upside down. Wouldn't that be cool? And they're like, no, that's a really bad idea. I don't know why I just said that. But speaking and saying that out loud, it lets you start kind of coming up with other ideas. So I think if we filter our language too much, then we often will hinder creativity. So to almost untrain yourself to be an adult, and which leads me to my third point, which is consulting with children and kids. So I think one of my most professional development moments that I've had is every year going to my kids' school and going to the career day and giving them a plan of their school, and I give them some little cutouts of attractions, and I watch them and encourage them to turn their school into a theme park, and I just watch their excitement and their ideas of what this could be or what that couldn't be and stuff, and when you try to think of things through eyes of a child, you realize there's a lot of untapped knowledge out there. There's a lot of untapped creativity that us as adults tend to just hinder our own selves with our own filters.
Yeah. Well, Christine, I want to throw it over to you in your experience. What are the vital components to maintaining a high level of creative engagement in the workplace?
It really is, like with here, like a lot of my engagement comes from basically the people that work here. Like that is like my number one thing, is like everybody who we've brought into these walls have definitely gone under like the scrutiny of like, can you work with other people? Are you fun to be around? Like, can you tell this person, hey, I want to build an upside down carousel? Like, would that fly with them? And most people here, it really does. They're like, yeah, that's hilarious. It won't work, but we could branch off to something else because I like that idea. It's fun. And so pretty much everyone here I could walk up to and say like my idea for like a project or my own work. And I show a ton of people my own personal work, which is I normally don't do that. But I feel comfortable here because I can get creative feedback. I can get how people will react to my stuff because I trust them and that they're not going to like belittle me into the ground or anything like that. So it's been the most I've ever been engaged with other people, especially in an office space.
Yeah. Let's talk about how a creative director like yourself, Mark, are there ways to ensure that a team doesn't lose their creative energy?
I think allowing your mind to transfer into other things. I think one thing Falcon's is good at is we kind of can cycle around between projects. So, just like writer's block, you have creative blocks.
Sure.
There's only so much of this one project that you can look at. And so having others in the office and really encouraging people to like, oh, come over here for a little bit. Let's look at this project, which is completely opposite of what you're working on now. And that kind of stuff, I think, will help creativity keep going.
As a writer, I can relate to this, having writer's block or just like being mentally temporarily blocked. And, when you start with that blank page, it's the same as an illustrator, right? You're staring at a blank screen. How do you get over your mental blocks?
A lot of the times I'll like draw something completely different. I'll have another screen open and I'll take 5-10 minutes to like just blur whatever I want on the page, whether it be like characters or like little illustrations of something, just like something just that is completely different. And then sometimes that kind of gets that weird little energy burst out of me where I just don't know what to do or I'm just not drawing right that day. And then I can finally kind of be like, okay, take a breath. Yeah. And then you can like draw it. But mainly that's what I do. If I'm having trouble, I'll like look at like some of my favorite artists and I'll like get inspiration from other places, or I'll go like take a walk or go to a place where that kind of just like calms me and just kind of like where I can think. Or I'll listen to if there's any sort of like music that reminds me of my project. So that way I can kind of like get into the zone again. But a lot of the times I'll look at like other people's work, or I'll like read something, or I'll just do something different but still can inspire me to want to be creative. And usually that kind of like gets me out of my rut.
Yeah, a lot of good techniques there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Christine and Mark, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. It's been fun.
That wraps up our episode about sparking creativity. A special thank you to Lee Kitchen for calling in from Canada and sharing his fantastic stories and knowledge. And I want to thank Mark Spenser and Christine Arnold for their time and insight. And also check out the new blog on our website, A Day in the Life of a Creative Director. It's a really good read. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next month with an all-new episode. Thank you for listening to Experience Imagination, a Falcon's Creative Group production. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. Be sure to check out falconscreativegroup.com and follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you have ideas for future episodes or just want to drop us a message, send an email to podcast@falconscreativegroup.com.